It's 2 a.m. Somewhere, a baby is screaming and an exhausted parent is bouncing, shushing, and silently negotiating with a tiny human who refuses every offer on the table. Here's a number that should make that parent feel a little better, or at least a little less crazy. A baby's cry can hit 120 decibels. That is the same volume as an ambulance siren. Standing 2 feet away from your own child at 2 a.m. is, acoustically speaking, like standing next to an emergency vehicle. Now here's the part that should not make evolutionary sense. For most of human history, our ancestors lived surrounded by lions, hyenas, and leopards that hunted by sound. Staying quiet wasn't a parenting tip, it was survival. So why would evolution design a baby that screams louder than a smoke alarm, in a world where screaming could get the whole group killed? This is one of the strangest puzzles in evolutionary psychology, and the answer is going to change how you think about every single cry you've ever heard, including the ones that are happening in someone's house right now. Let's start with why that sound feels so unbearable. It's not just loud, it's engineered. A crying baby produces irregular gasping, choking pauses, and a fundamental frequency that mimics the sound of someone in respiratory distress. Your brain doesn't process it as annoying noise, it processes it as someone is dying. That distinction matters because most loud, repetitive sounds eventually fade into the background. A ticking clock, a humming fridge. Your brain habituates, it stops noticing. Infant crying is one of the only sounds the human brain refuses to habituate to. Researchers have tested this directly. Play a baby crying in the background while someone tries to do a simple focus task, and their brain waves show a massive spike in a signal called N450, which is your brain's internal conflict alarm. At the same time, the signal responsible for paying attention to your actual task collapses. In plain terms, the cry doesn't sit in the background. It hijacks the foreground. Every time. No exceptions, no matter how many times you've heard it before. That's not bad luck. That's the design working exactly as intended. A sound you can tune out is a sound that can be ignored long enough for something terrible to happen to the baby producing it. Evolution built a sound that makes ignoring it almost physically impossible. And the baby side of this isn't pleasant either. In the womb, crying simply wasn't an option. There was no air to breathe. Outside the womb, an infant's brain floods with stress hormones the moment it's uncomfortable, and it has zero ability to switch that response off by itself. No inner voice saying, "Calm down, someone's coming." Just a raw, escalating alarm, waiting for an adult nervous system to come along and do the calming from the outside. So you have one brain that cannot ignore the signal, and another brain that cannot turn it off without help. That is not a flaw in either system. That's the whole point. Crying isn't a malfunction. It's a deliberately unskippable request for a body to come close. So if loud crying was so dangerous around predators, how did anyone survive it? The honest answer is, ancient parents mostly didn't have to survive it because the crying barely had time to get loud in the first place. Anthropologists studying the Kung-san, hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari, found something remarkable. Kung mothers respond to a fussing baby within 15 seconds, 88% of the time. Not 88% within a few minutes, within 15 seconds. The remaining cases get a response in under 30. Here's the twist. Kung babies don't cry less often than babies anywhere else. The urge to cry shows up on the same schedule across every culture on Earth. What's different is the ending. A. Kung infants' average crying episode lasts somewhere between 10 and 60 seconds. Compare that to babies in places like the Netherlands or the United States, where single episodes routinely stretch past 30 minutes, sometimes for hours. The difference isn't the baby, it's the gap between the first whimper and someone showing up. Part of the reason that gap stayed so small is something researchers call the carry effect. Hunter-gatherer infants are almost never set down. Kung babies spend around 90% of daylight hours in physical contact with the caregiver's body, carried upright in a sling, facing outward, watching the world instead of staring at a ceiling. Human breast milk is famously low in fat compared to other mammals, which is basically biology's way of saying, you weren't supposed to put this baby down for long anyway. You were supposed to feed it constantly and carry it the rest of the time. And it wasn't only mothers doing the carrying. Among the Ife people of the Congo, infants are passed between different caregivers close to 4 times every hour. And by 18 weeks old, a baby might regularly interact with around 14 different people in a single day. Among the Aka people, fathers hold their infants more than fathers in almost any other documented culture on the planet. Raising a baby was never designed to be a two-person job. It was built to be a village-sized one. This isn't just a nice anthropological story. Someone actually tested it with a real controlled experiment. In 1986, researchers Urs Hunziker and Ronald Barr ran a study with 99 mother-infant pairs in Montreal. One group was told to simply carry their baby at least 3 extra hours a day on top of normal holding. The other group followed standard practice of the time, putting babies down in a crib with toys and mobiles to look at. The results were dramatic. At 6 weeks old, the peak age for infant fussiness, the extra caring group cried 43% less overall. During the worst stretch of the day, the early evening witching hours, crying dropped by 51%. And here's the detail that quietly destroys the idea that babies just cry to manipulate you into picking them up. Total sleep time and feeding time barely changed. The babies weren't being spoiled into silence, their nervous systems were being regulated. That regulation effect shows up in the body in a very literal way. When a caregiver holds an infant, their heart rates begin to sink. The baby's breathing rhythm steadies. Researchers call this co-regulation, and it's not a metaphor. It shows up directly in heart rate variability measurements. Before a certain age, babies are not fully capable of calming their own nervous system. They borrow yours, physically, in real time. Now, in the interest of being honest, this story has a genuinely uncomfortable chapter too, and it's worth sitting with for a second. In 2011, researcher Wendy Middlemiss studied 25 mother-infant pairs going through a sleep training program based on letting babies cry themselves to sleep. By day 3, the babies had stopped crying entirely. On the surface, that looked like total success. The mother's stress hormones dropped sharply, which makes sense, the screaming had stopped. But when researchers checked the baby's cortisol levels on that same quiet, peaceful-looking night 3, the baby's internal stress levels were just as high as day 1 when they'd been crying for hours. The baby hadn't calmed down. It had simply learned that crying wasn't getting a response anymore and stopped signaling. The distress didn't disappear. It just went silent. To be clear, this was one small study with real limitations researchers have pointed out, including no control group and an unfamiliar hospital setting. It's not the final word on sleep training, but it's a genuinely important caution against assuming silence always means calm. So, what do you actually do with all of this if you're anywhere near a crying baby tonight? First, the crying is not a flaw, and it's not a power move against you. It's a precisely engineered, biologically honest signal. Your brain isn't supposed to be able to ignore it. That's not weakness on your part. That's 40,000 generations of evolution doing exactly its job, using you as the off switch. Second, speed matters more than perfection. You don't need the perfect response. You need a fast one. Pediatrician Harvey Karp built an entire calming method: swaddling, side positioning, shushing, swinging, sucking, and every single piece of it is really just a modern mechanical stand-in for one ancient thing: a body that shows up quickly and stays close. Third, and this might be the most important one, you were never supposed to do this alone. In hunter-gatherer communities, the ratio of available adults to children was often better than 10 to 1. In a lot of modern households, it's one exhausted adult, an empty apartment, and a baby that has no concept of time zones or work schedules tomorrow. That isn't a personal failure. That's a fundamental mismatch between the environment your nervous system expects and the one you're actually living in. If you're a new parent watching this and barely holding it together, the ancient solution was never try harder alone. It was, don't be alone in the first place. Call someone, trade off, let somebody else hold the baby for 20 minutes while you breathe. For most of human history, no parent listened to a screaming infant in an empty room while the rest of the tribe slept 14 feet away, unaware. Someone always came. Fast. Every time. That cry was never a malfunction. It was a perfectly calibrated invitation, asking the people around it to do what humans have always done best: show up for each other.